Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. Diyan nyo din makakasama ang DZJV 1458 Radyo Calabarzon. Like, follow, and subscribe sa aming mga social media accounts at DZJV 1458 sa Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, at YouTube. Para makilala ang iyong negosyo, halina't magpaanunsyo sa radyo sa DZJV 1458 Radyo Calabarzon. Sa abot kayang halaga, ang budget mo ay hindi masisira. Maririnig ka pa sa Quezon, Cavite, Rizal, Batangas at Laguna kasama pa ang Metro Manila. Para sa karagdagang impormasyon at para maka-avail ng mga swak na advertisement package, tumawag sa 545-2153 o mag-text sa 0932-228-3828. Naghahatid ng napapanahong impormasyon at inspirasyon para sa buong Calabarzon. Tagasulong ng mga proyektong pangkaunlaran para sa katagumpayan ng bawat mamamayan. Himpilang naglilingkod sa Diyos at sa bayan. DZJV 1458 Radyo Calabarzon.
Hello everyone, welcome back to Teaching the Bible. I'm your host, Michael Koch. Teaching the Bible is a weekly radio and television program that details and explains the major events that take place in the Bible and the major teachings as we move forward through the Bible week by week. Now, last couple weeks we talked about the four major kings of Israel, which were King Saul, King David, King Solomon, and King Rehoboam. There's many more kings than that, but those are the four that we covered in this series of teachings. And remember how we ended, which was the kingdom of Israel split into two kingdoms. It was formerly one kingdom of Israel made up of the 12 tribes of Israel. And due to King Solomon's great sins of having 700 wives and following their gods instead of our God, and then his son King Rehoboam, who told the people, I'm going to be so much harder on you than my father King Solomon ever was, 10 of the tribes said, you know what, King Rehoboam, we're not going to follow you anymore. And they split. They stopped following King Rehoboam. They formed their own new kingdom. They kept the name Israel. And so they're the northern 10 tribe now, Kingdom of Israel, with Samaria as its new capital. And two of the tribes continue to follow King Rehoboam, and that was the tribes of Judah and Benjamin. And they formed what would be called the southern kingdom of Judah, which Jerusalem maintained its capital. Now, today we're going to talk about, it's a little bit odd, the way the Bible has this place, it's kind of a little bit out of the chronological order. We're going to focus on today, two of the three books that we're going to focus on today are going to be how Israel was rebuilt after the Babylonian exiles. Now, the Babylonian exiles are a big deal, and we're going to get into them when we get into the books of the prophets. And the books of the prophets talk a lot about, they focus around the Babylonian exiles. And what happened to Babylonian exiles was the people kept turning away from God to follow false gods. And after repeated warnings from God, they wouldn't repent. And finally, God said, fine, you want to follow these pagan kingdoms? I'll show you what it's like. He took his protection away, and they were conquered. The northern tribe of Israel was conquered by the Assyrians and taken away in exile. Southern tribe of Judah was conquered twice by King Nebuchadnezzar of the kingdom of Babylon, taken away in exile. And when we get into the prophets, it goes really in depth into that. But what comes before that in the Bible are the books of Ezra and Nehemiah, and it kind of out of order because it talks mainly about Israel being restored, the kingdom of Judah being restored after the Babylonian exiles take place. So it kind of talks more about the Jerusalem and Judah being restored after the Babylonian exiles take place before it really gets into depth talking about the Babylonian exiles. So we're going to pick it up today. We're going to cover the books of Nehemiah, Ezra, and Judith. Now, during the period of the kings, there were many good kings over Israel and Judah, but even more bad ones who did not follow what God instructed them to do. They ignored God's instructions and did what they wanted to do. Sometimes their actions are very sinful. Eventually, God ran out of patience with these bad kings of Israel and Judah. Israel, however, was much worse than Judah in rebelling against God and following the false gods of other countries instead of our God. God warned them many times through the prophets to stop doing this and return to him, but they would not listen. Since the kings and the people of Israel did not want to follow God's instructions, God took his help and protection away from Israel, which is a northern 10-tribe kingdom. They were conquered by the Assyrians and taken away to Assyria as captives in an exile. And this occurred because the people of Israel had sinned against the Lord their God, who had brought them up out of the land of Egypt from under the hand of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and had feared other gods, and walked in the customs of the nations whom the Lord drove out before the people of Israel, and in the customs that the kings of Israel had practiced. And the people of Israel did secretly against the Lord their God things that were not right. That's 2 Kings chapter 17, verses 7 and 9. And when the northern tribe of Israel was taken away by the Assyrians, they were gone for hundreds of years. They were taken away in exile for a long time. Now, some of the practices the people of Israel engaged in included sacrificing their own sons and daughters to Baal and other false gods. This upset God greatly. Therefore, the Lord was very angry with Israel and removed them out of his sight. None was now left but the tribe of Judah only. The 2-tribe kingdom remained. That's in 2 Kings chapter 17, verse 18. But over time, the southern 2-tribe kingdom of Judah also greatly offended God by following the evil practices of the pagan nations around them. One king of Judah was particularly evil. His name was King Manasseh. He rebuilt temples to worship false gods and demons. He put altars to these false gods in the holy place of Judah and instructed the people of Judah to worship these other gods. King Manasseh burned his own son alive as a sacrifice to these other evil false gods. That's in 2 Kings chapter 21, verses 1 and 9. As a consequence, God took his protection away from the kingdom of Judah. The kingdom of Judah was captured by the very powerful pagan king of Babylon, King Nebuchadnezzar. The people of the kingdom of Babylon were called the Chaldeans. King Nebuchadnezzar brought back to Babylon all the important and skilled people of Judah, only leaving the very poorest people behind. He also carried back to Babylon all of Judah's treasures and riches. King Nebuchadnezzar appointed a man named Zedekiah as king over his now captured territory of Judah. King Zedekiah soon rebelled against King Nebuchadnezzar, however. King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon and the Chaldeans invaded Jerusalem a second time because of this. They killed or captured everyone who was in the city of Jerusalem except for the poorest of the people whom they left alone. King Nebuchadnezzar burned all the important buildings in the kingdom to the ground. He broke down the walls that surrounded Jerusalem and carried back anything of value back to Babylon. Now, these series of events are called the Babylonian exiles. And you can read that in 2 Kings chapters 24 and 25. Now we're going to read about a man named Nehemiah in the book of Nehemiah. And we're going to read today, we're going to read about Nehemiah, we're going to read about Ezra, and we're going to read about Esther. In a nutshell, after the Babylonian exiles were over and God moved the hearts of the pagan kings that captured them to let the Israelites return to Judah, Nehemiah was a man that was sent back to rebuild the wall around Jerusalem and to rebuild the temple. Ezra was a man that was sent back by God from the exiles to be the new priest over the newly reformed temple in Judah and to reteach the people about our God because they weren't taught about him while they're in their exile. So let's read about Nehemiah. When King Nebuchadnezzar of the Chaldeans captured the city of Jerusalem and carried the people of Judah off into exile to Babylon, he broke down Jerusalem's protective walls and burned down its important buildings. Now there is a Jewish man named Nehemiah who was still in exile under King Artaxerxes of Persia. King Artaxerxes was a king whom God inspired to allow the exiled Jews to rebuild the Jewish temple in Jerusalem and also appoint Ezra to be the high priest to the Jews there. Nehemiah was the cupbearer to King Artaxerxes. You read that in Nehemiah chapter 1. Now Nehemiah heard that for the remnant of his people still living back in Jerusalem, remember the poorest of the people were left there, everybody else was taken away in the exile. He also learned the wall of the city remained torn down back in Jerusalem and its gates were destroyed. Nehemiah prayed to God that God would fix this situation. Now while Nehemiah was serving the king as his cupbearer, the king noticed that Nehemiah looked sad. King Artaxerxes said to Nehemiah, "Why is your face sad, seeing you are not sick? There is nothing but sadness in your heart." Nehemiah chapter 2, verse 2. Nehemiah became afraid of this because if you look sad in front of the king, they thought you might have intention to do harm to the king. They might kill you if you look sad in front of the king. However, Nehemiah gathered his courage and said to the king, "Let the king live forever. Why should not my face be sad? When the city of Jerusalem, the place of my father's graves, lies in ruins, and its gates have been destroyed by fire." Nehemiah chapter 2, verse 3. The king asked Nehemiah what he wanted from him. Nehemiah humbly asked the king if he would send Nehemiah to Judah so he could rebuild his homeland. The king asked him how long he would be gone and when he would return. When Nehemiah told him how long he thought it would take for him to do this, the king granted Nehemiah's request. The king also wrote letters to the rulers of territories under his dominion to give Nehemiah the building materials he would need to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem and parts of the city. "And the king granted me what I asked for," said Nehemiah, "for the good hand of my God was upon me." That's from Nehemiah chapter 2, verse 1 to 8. Now, this is a pretty remarkable thing. God moved the hearts of the kings of Persia, the Persian Empire, to let these captives that they had taken away in an exile, return and rebuild their homeland and pay for everything. That normally didn't happen back then. "Oh, by the way, you people that we conquered and captured and took away as slaves, yeah, I decide as king, you know what, I'm going to let y'all return home. And not only that, I'm going to give you all the money you need to rebuild your city, and whatever you want, I'll give you, and you could go back home and rebuild and start everything." God moved their hearts to do that. So Nehemiah gathered a group of Jewish men, and they began to rebuild the walls and gates of Jerusalem that had been destroyed by King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon years earlier, during the Babylonian exiles. They encountered opposition and threats of violence from several people who did not want the Israelites to return to Jerusalem. Nehemiah and his men also faced oppression from local officials as they worked. Throughout this, they prayed to God for guidance and protection, and God provided both for them. With God's help, it took Nehemiah and his men only 52 days to rebuild the wall around the entire city of Jerusalem. The enemies of the Jews that were rebuilding the wall were astounded that it only took them 52 days to rebuild it. They realized that God was helping them do this. Out of fear of God, they no longer tried to stop the Jews from rebuilding Jerusalem. Although the wall around the city was now complete, there was only a few people living within Jerusalem. Remember, only the poorest people were there. They were left behind. And none of the houses that were destroyed by King Nebuchadnezzar were rebuilt. That's from Nehemiah chapters 3 to 6. Shortly after the wall around Jerusalem was rebuilt by Nehemiah, 42,360 people returned from the Babylonian exile back to the areas of Jerusalem and Judah, along with approximately 7,500 male and female servants. So God moved the hearts of the Israelite captors to allow the Israelites to return home. All the people gathered together, and Ezra, the scribe and priest, we're going to hear about him next, he read the book of the law of Moses to them. While they're away in this exile, they're in a pagan country, so I guess they weren't taught at all about God. They had to be retaught about our God, and Ezra was the guy that God sent back from the exile to teach them. Nehemiah became the governor of the area. Jewish religious worship practices to God finally began once again in the areas of Jerusalem and Judah after the Babylonian exiles ended. That's Nehemiah chapter 7 to 13. So, Nehemiah was a guy, God had his hand in everything. God moved the hearts of the kings of Persia, Media Persia, to allow the Israelites to return. God used Nehemiah to lead the rebuilding of the wall around Jerusalem and rebuild the temple. And now we're going to hear about Ezra, the man God used to reteach the people about God and become their priest once again, now that they return home. So now we're in the book of Ezra. Within a few decades after the kingdom of Judah was conquered by the Chaldeans and its citizens were exiled to Babylon, the Babylonian kingdom transitioned into the kingdom of Persia. The Persians had a king named Cyrus. God stirred the spirit of King Cyrus to help the captured people of Judah and return them to their home. So now we're going to read right from the Bible the proclamation that Cyrus gave to allow the people to return home to Jerusalem. So we're in the book of Ezra, and this is Ezra chapter 1, verses 1 to 4. The proclamation of King Cyrus. In the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, that the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah might be fulfilled. Later we'll see the prophet Jeremiah will predict all this stuff that's going to happen in the Babylonian exiles, and predicted that they would return. The Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, the king of Persia, so that he made a proclamation throughout all his kingdom and also put it in writing. This is what he said. Thus says Cyrus, king of Persia, the Lord, the God of heaven, has given me all kingdoms of the earth, and he has charged me to build him a house at Jerusalem, which is in Judah. Whoever among you of all his people, may his God be with him, and let him go up to Jerusalem, which is in Judah, and rebuild the house of the Lord, the God of Israel. He is the God who is in Jerusalem. And let each survivor, in whatever place he sojourns, be assisted by the men of his place with silver and gold, with goods and with beasts, besides freewill offerings for the house of God that is in Jerusalem. So he's saying, basically, God came to me as king. I'm king, and God came to me and said, hey, I want you to allow Jerusalem to be rebuilt. And he said, okay. And he sent the people, the Israelites, back to rebuild it, and he's funding it too. The temple was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon when his army conquered Jerusalem in the territory of Judah. The people of the tribes of Judah and Benjamin, and the priests and the Levites were stirred up by God to return to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple of God. King Cyrus of Persia returned all the precious items that former King Nebuchadnezzar carried away to Babylon when he conquered Judah in the Babylonian exiles. Several thousand people and their descendants who were in exile in Persia as a result of King Nebuchadnezzar's conquering of Judah now returned to Judah under the proclamation of King Cyrus to rebuild the house of God. That's in Ezra chapters 1 and 2. And God sent a man named Ezra to teach the Israelites about God. He was a scribe skilled in the law of Moses that the Lord, the God of Israel, had given, and the king granted him all that he asked, for the hand of the Lord was on him. Ezra chapter 7, verse 6. For Ezra had set his heart to study the law of the Lord, and to do it and to teach his statutes and rules in Israel. That's Ezra chapter 7, verse 10. Don't forget, many of these Jews were born. I believe that Judah was exiled for 7 years, so many of the people were born in this pagan empire where God wasn't taught. They had to be completely retaught about God, and Ezra's the guy that God picked to do it. Ezra was now both a priest and a scribe. King Artaxerxes of Persia instructed Ezra to appoint magistrates and judges who might judge the people in areas of Judah and to teach them the laws of Ezra's God. Ezra took several hundred men with him from Babylon and went to the rebuilt temple in Jerusalem. It was rebuilt by Nehemiah and his group, as King Artaxerxes had instructed him. Ezra became the head priest at the temple in Jerusalem, and he served the Jews that returned to Judah from the exile in that capacity as head priest. One of the things they returned to dealing with was the same problem that got them exiled in the first place. When the Israelites returned to Jerusalem and Judah, they once again started intermixing with pagan people around them, marrying them, and following the pagan gods. That's what got them exiled by God in the first place, and they got into it again. You'll see the Israelites do this all throughout the Old Testament. Okay, so now we're going to read a story in the Bible from the book of Esther. This is one of my favorite stories in the Bible. It's almost reminds me kind of Cinderella-like. See what you think. I've been a Sunday school teacher for about 10 years, and I teach my Sunday school students the Bible. They're 5th grade, and they love the story of Esther. They just do. So let's hear about Esther. The book of Esther takes place during the time that the Israelites were exiled in the Medo-Persian kingdom. The Israelites in exile during this particular period were ruled by King Ahasuerus of the kingdom of Medo-Persia, and it encompassed 127 provinces ranging from India to Ethiopia. King Ahasuerus had a huge party for the army, the princes, and the governors of the kingdom that lasted for many days. Now, he decided to hold a banquet at the end of this, and after 7 days of partying, the king ordered that his queen, Queen Vashti, be brought to this party so he could show her off to everyone there and show everybody how beautiful she was. Well, her response was, "I'm not coming to no party with all your drunken friends so you could show off how hot I am to all your drunken friends. No way." That's pretty much what she said. Well, the king became very mad at this. And the king spoke to his consultants on how to handle this. And they said, "King, listen, you need to replace her as queen, because if it gets out that you ordered the queen to do something and the queen refused to listen to you and nothing happened, none of our wives are going to listen to us. They're all going to say, well, Queen Vashti didn't listen to the king when he told her what to do. Why should I listen to you? And they were really afraid of that. So he said, for our sake, you got to get rid of this queen and get a new queen. The king thought that was a good idea. So Queen Vashti, therefore, had her title as queen removed. Young men who were attendants of King Ahasuerus then suggested to him that he should have all the beautiful young single women from across the kingdom be brought to him, so he may choose a new queen from among them. The king agreed to her suggestion and made it so. You'll see this king, it sounds like whatever anybody suggests to him, he goes, okay, yeah, whatever you want, go ahead, do it. That was in Esther chapter 1 and Esther chapter 2, verses 1 to 4. Now, at this time, there's a good Jewish man named Mordecai. He was a Jewish exile living in the Media-Persia kingdom ruled by King Ahasuerus. And this is all taking place during the Babylonian exiles. His great-grandfather was brought to this kingdom by King Nebuchadnezzar, the former king of Babylon. And now it's the Media-Persian kingdom. It transitioned from the kingdom of Babylon into the Media-Persian kingdom. And his great-grandfather was brought there with many other Jews in the Babylonian exile. Mordecai was raising up a young woman named Esther. Esther's parents died when she was young. Mordecai was an older cousin of Esther, and he adopted her as his own daughter because she had no parents. Esther was a very beautiful young woman. When the king's order was sent out to bring beautiful women to the palace to select a new queen, Esther was brought to the palace along with many other women. You read that in Esther chapter 2, verses 5 to 11. Esther was the nicest and most beautiful of all the women brought to the king's palace. Over time, she became the favorite of King Ahasuerus, and he eventually made her queen to replace Queen Vashti, who disobeyed him. Each day during a certain time, Esther's father Mordecai would walk in front of the palace to find out how Esther was doing and what was happening to her. Esther did not tell anyone that she was Jewish or from Israeli ancestry, because her father Mordecai told her not to. One day when Mordecai was standing at the king's gate to hear how his daughter Esther was doing, two of the king's servants became angry with the king, and they were making plans to kill him. Mordecai overheard this. Mordecai told this to Queen Esther, his daughter, who she then told the king what Mordecai discovered. The two men were arrested for trying to kill the king. Mordecai might have saved the king's life. You can read that in Esther chapter 2, verse 19 to 23. Now, there's an official in his kingdom at the time named Haman. The king promoted Haman to be second in charge in the kingdom behind the king. Everyone who Haman passed had to bow down to Haman under the king's orders. Mordecai would never bow down to Haman when Haman passed him. Mordecai said that he was Jewish, and under Jewish law, God was the only person that people should bow down to. Jewish was a name given to the people of Israel. Remember, they were captured, living in this other country now at this time due to the Babylonian exile. Haman became very angry that Mordecai would not bow down to him. He decided that he would not only kill Mordecai for not bowing down to him, but he would kill every Jewish person in the whole kingdom. That's in Esther chapter 3, verses 1 to 6. Now, this is one of the first times that we hear of a plot to commit a Jewish genocide in the Bible, but it's not the first time we're going to hear it in the Bible. It's also not the first time we'll hear it in history. It just happened last century. So Haman went to the king and he said, "King, there are a group of people living in this kingdom called the Jews. They're not following your laws and commands, and I think it would be in the best interest of the kingdom if they be destroyed." King said to Haman, "Oh, do whatever you think is the right thing to do with them." King was kind of easily, whatever he told him to do, okay, yeah, fine. He didn't seem to really have a lot of original thought, or he was easily swayed by comments made to him. So, a letter was sent out by Haman to all the officials of the kingdom that on December 13th, all the Jews in the kingdom were to be killed. Mordecai heard about this plan and he was extremely upset. He was Jewish. Mordecai told his daughter, Queen Esther, that Haman planned to kill all the Jewish people in the kingdom, even her, because she was Jewish. He asked Esther, as queen, to do something to save the Jews and herself, because she too is Jewish. And he told her, And who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this? That's in Esther chapter 4, verse 14. Queen Esther sent a message to all the Jews in the kingdom to fast for 3 days, do not eat or drink anything, and to keep praying to God to save them. Queen Esther then came up with a plan to try to save her people. Queen Esther went to the king and asked if a banquet could be held and to make sure Haman was there. The king agreed. Haman was happy he was invited to his banquet. He was later talking to his wife about it. Haman's wife reminded him that Mordecai would not bow down to him, and she suggested that a 75-foot pole be put up, and Mordecai would be hanged on it at the banquet. Haman thought that was a good idea. Now, the night before the banquet, the king could not sleep. He asked his servants to read to him reports of things that happened recently in the kingdom. In the reports, he discovered that Mordecai saved his life by reporting that 2 of the king's servants were planning on killing the king. The king asked, "What was done to reward Mordecai for saving my life?" "Nothing," they replied. The king called in Haman, who just finished building the 75-foot pole to hang Mordecai. The king asked Haman, "Haman, what should be done to honor a man that I like?" Haman assumed the king was going to honor him. Haman said, "Well, king, I think you should put the king's robes on the man, put him on the king's horse, put the king's crown on his head, and parade him through the city, saying, 'This is what happens to a man that the king honors.'" The king then said, "That's a great idea. Do all that for Mordecai the Jew, because he saved my life and I want to honor him." Well, Haman became terrified. He did all those great things for Mordecai. Haman put the king's robes on him, put him on a horse with the king's crown on his head, and he paraded Mordecai through the streets, saying, "This is what happens to a man that the king honors." Haman then ran and he hid, because the king now loved Mordecai, and Haman was actively trying to kill him. That's in Esther chapter 6. At the banquet, Queen Esther told the king that Haman planned not only to kill Mordecai, who saved the king's life, but he wanted to kill all the Jewish people, including her, because she was also a Jew. The king became enraged at Haman. The king was then told that Haman just built a 75-foot pole and planned to hang Mordecai on it at this banquet. The king said, "Oh, really? Well, go hang Haman on that pole that he built to kill Mordecai, who saved my life." Haman was hanged on that pole, and Mordecai and the queen Esther saved the Jews from destruction. The king stopped all the plans that Haman set to kill all the Jews on December 13th. Because Mordecai saved the king's life, he was promoted to a very powerful position in the kingdom, and he was loved by the people of the land. That's in Esther chapter 7, 8, and 9. Again, this is Teaching the Bible. I'm Michael Koch. I hope you liked it, and I hope you could tune in next Saturday, 3:30. Take care. God bless. Bye-bye.
Naghahatid ng napapanahong impormasyon at inspirasyon para sa buong Calabarzon. Tagasulong ng mga proyektong pangkaunlaran para sa katagumpayan ng bawat mamamayan.